This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Welcome. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ian Sutherland, Vice President for Grenfell Campus, Memorial University. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to this fantastic event featuring Joshua Whitehead. Joshua, it's wonderful to have you here. And of course, as we gather together, we do so respectfully acknowledging that the territory upon which we are gathering here in Corner Brook and upon which Grenfell Campus is situated is traditional Mi'kmaq territory. Here within the place we call the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, we also recognize with great and profound respect the histories, cultures, and traditions of the Innu, the Inuit, the Mi'kmaq, and the Beothuk. So Joshua, I just want to say we are absolutely thrilled to have you with us. It's a pleasure to welcome you virtually to Grenfell Campus, to Memorial University, to the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, and of course to Corner Brook, the city. Personally, I also want to say I'm very excited. I am a fan of your work. I really loved the very powerful Johnny Appleseed novel. It was absolutely fantastic. When Natalie and Stephanie first mentioned this event to me some months ago, I screamed a little bit in excitement. So it's wonderful personally also to have you here. So with that, I will turn it over to Stephanie.
Thanks, Ian. My name is Stephanie Mckenzie. I teach in the English program at Grenfell Campus. And this is Natalie Pender, who teaches French at Grenfell Campus. On behalf of the Pride Room, I'm going to turn this over to Ivan White. Ivan is from the Mi'kmaq community of Flat Bay, and he's an emissary for his culture, heritage, and people. He practices two-eyed seeing as a connector of Mi'kmaq community and various non-Indigenous organizations. And I'm very proud to say that he is Student Affairs Officer for Indigenous Affairs at Grenfell Campus. And Ivan.
Great, Joshua. I'll be brief in my words, as my ancestors' community and teachings have provided me the gift of connecting people, and not necessarily those of a dynamic public speaker. I'd like to welcome you virtually to Mi'kma'ki, the land of the Mi'kmaq, specifically Dahamguk, now known as the island of Newfoundland. I hope that even virtually you will feel the love and respect that everyone in attendance brings for you and in turn for each other. This is a great honor and a privilege for us all to be here, to hear you speak and to share with you. Let us all take what we need and give back to each other in kind tonight. Wilalin, thank you for your presence with us this evening.
Well, Tanzana Tozamak. Hi, I'm Josh. I'm so just happy to be here with all you folks. Usually when I start events, I usually say just call me Josh. If you add the extra syllable of UA to call me fully Joshua, only two people call me that, my partner and my mother. So it usually means I'm in trouble. So Josh is fine. Josh is fine.
My apologies.
No worries. And unlike you, the Cree, we are very verbose. So I will try to also keep myself in the timeline. But I just want to say I'm so very excited to be here. I wish I could be there with you folks. I've never been to the East Coast before. I've never passed Quebec. So I'm still a little perplexed about the 3.5-hour time change. That gets me every time. And this is why I teach in the English department at the University of Calgary, because mathematics is not my forte, but I also just wanted to say hi. Sorry, Stephanie, I don't know if I stepped on some toes. It's the Cree in me.
Well, That's all right. I was just going to rave about what a wonderful writer you are and explain who you are to the audience. I'm sure who they know. Do you mind if I just take a couple of seconds to brag? Okay. So Joshua Whitehead, whom you're here to see tonight, is a Two Spirits Nehio member of Peguis First Nation in Treaty 1. He is an associate professor at the University of Calgary in Treaty 7, where he teaches English and Indigenous Studies. He's the author of Full Metal Indigiqueer with Talon Books in 2017, a very, very innovative book of poetry. It's wonderful. My students loved it when I taught it years ago, Josh. And of course, he is the author of Johnny Appleseed, which I think a lot of people have heard about, both in Canada and outside. This was longlisted for the Giller Prize, shortlisted for the Indigenous Voices Award, the Governor General's Literary Award, the Amazon Canada First Novel Award, the Carol Shields Winnipeg Book Award, and it won the Lambda Literary Award for Gay Fiction, and the Georges Bugnett Award for Fiction, and Canada Reads 2021. His third book, Making Love with the Land, is slated to be released in spring 2022, and with Knopf Canada. He is also the editor of Love After the End, Two-Spirit Utopias and Dystopias with Arsenal Pulp 2021, which won a Lambda Literary Award for LGBTQ anthology. Welcome, Joshua.
Thank you. I guess I'm a bit of a glutton for punishment. Finishing my dissertation, I just finished my PhD a handful of months ago and started as an assistant professor here in Treaty 7 in Mckenzie, also known as Calgary, of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which I'm a guest to. It's also a fun icebreaker for me meeting Blackfoot folk here, because the Cree and the Blackfoot, we don't have the best / shiniest history. But then I can also say I'm half Nish, half Anishinaabe too, so that also gets me out of some hot water. So it's the best icebreaker if you ever visit here. I'm so happy again to be with you folks. I'm going to share a little bit from the Glitter Princess himself, Johnny Appleseed, and then I'm just excited to talk with folks, answer any questions that you might have, as well as just kind of give a brief little overview of this book, of perhaps what Two-Spirit means, and then delve into any questions that you may have. So this little guy, as I'm sure after Canada Reads and it came out in 2018, here we are in 2022, and I'm still flabbergasted that he's so beloved and we're talking about him still. But he's like a little bit of a revenant or a poltergeist to me. He takes over every single stage he can. So I feel like I've read this book multiple times. I have, after doing the audiobook and doing all these readings. So I just kind of played Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo and picked passages because I didn't know what to pick. And these are ones I don't really read all that often, so I'm excited to return to them. So I'll read two little excerpts from two sections of the book. Oh no, I just need to also preface, if you hear someone going like full Shining on the door, like Jack Nicholson, that is my German Shepherd. His name is Chief. He's from my res too. He's a res dog. If you asked me what my cookum tastes like, I would tell you beehive corn syrup. She put that thick golden syrup on everything, on our French toast, and her tea, drizzled over Jello cake, and she found every excuse in the book to use that syrup in other ways, to wash her hair, clean her face, and once, when I burned my hand on the stove element, she soothed my burn with it. Heck, she even kept a baby jar full of corn syrup in her first aid kit. Emergencies, she'd always say. You never know when someone's going to fall into a shock. One day, when one of my auntie's blood sugar fell too low and she fainted, my cookum scooped her off the floor, cradled her neck in the crook of her elbow, and fed her a tablespoon of corn syrup. It's magic, my cookum said. This here is some magic in a $2 can. Sure enough, within 30 seconds, my aunt roused back to life. My cookum always stood by that magic, even as her diabetes began to consume her feet and her legs. One of her kitchen shelves was completely lined with those bright yellow bottles. Nowadays, my mom makes fun of that shelf when we look at photos. She loved that syrup so damn much that she even styled her hair after that goddamn bottle. And in fact, it was true. My Cookum's hair used to be coned into a beehive. While I may never understand my Cookum's odd hairstyle choices, I will confess I too can't stop myself from buying that same syrup. Every time I'm sick, I still take a spoonful, and when my taste buds fizz with that familiar sweetness, it feels like I'm with Cookum again in her too warm house. After she died, I found her recipe book tucked away in a box. It was the only keepsake of Cookum's I took, a little wooden box with a flower painted on top. There were hundreds of recipes inside, all handwritten on an assortment of papers, napkins, cards, envelopes. There I found her famous recipe for sweet and sour meatballs, which everyone loved. I found myself staring at it and tracing my fingers along the fine ridges of her writing. She was the only person I knew who always wrote in cursive. I could see her whole life wrapped up inside that little box of wonders. The loops of her I's and T's are perfect in the recipes she wrote when she was young, but her later entries are increasingly harder to read as her hands become hardened by arthritis. One day, on a whim, I decided to make her meatballs. Cookum usually used ground up elk or deer meat, but all I had was some regular hamburger. I cracked an egg, crushed up saltine crackers, diced a week-old onion, and kneaded it all together. I tried to be meticulous like Cookum taught me to be. Patience makes for a delicious dinner. I folded the meat mixture into itself, then rolled it into fat little balls, trying to keep them as uniform as possible, and then I fried them up in a pan, giving each one the love it deserved. I layered them gently in my crock pot, sprinkled salt and pepper over them, and closed the lid. The sauce was the hardest part. 2 cups of ketchup, brown sugar, vinegar, and soy sauce in a pot over high heat. But you have to keep stirring. I used to watch my Cookum at the stove stirring her pot, and the wobble of her loose skin beneath her arms, skin we used to call her bingo wings, but also the flexing of her hard muscles as she stirred. I learned this from the Hutterites, my boy, she said once as I watched. The Waldners, they're nice folk. When I was a kid, one of the trailers on the res caught fire and killed 2 young boys. Later, everyone on the res had a feast in their honor. The Waldners, a white Hutterite family who lived across the fields, arrived to pay their respects in a procession of large white vans. They took off their hats, placed them on their chests, and shook the elders' hands, who greeted them with toothless smiles. The Waldner women came bearing trays of food, chicken, pies, pierogies, and those sweet and sour meatballs. Boy, everyone ate good that night. After dinner, the family of the deceased spoke about their boys and how they were learning to become firekeepers, about how they died when one of them passed out with a lit cigarette. The Waldners then told us about how they had lost a boy too recently in a farming accident. My Cookum spent the evening talking with the Waldner women, sharing sewing tips and recipes, including the one for the meatballs, in which she shared a recipe for bannock, and she wrote it right down there on a napkin. When my sauce started to come together, I thickened it with cornstarch and water. Still, it was runnier than my Cookum's and tasted more sweet than sour, but it would do. I poured the sauce atop the meatballs in the slow cooker, tossed everything together, and let it simmer for a few hours. When it was nearly done, I texted Tias, "Dinner tonight," and it took him only a few minutes before I could hear his footsteps barreling down the hallway. "Heck, those smell right good," Tias said, opening the lid. "Get out of there, for God's sakes," I said, slapping his hand away. "Just a little sample. Make sure you did it right." I rolled my eyes. "Go ahead, then." Tias never had no patience, that boy. I stuck a teaspoon into the bubbling sauce and gave it to him. He slurped it down, but it burned his mouth, which made him stick out his tongue and pant like a dog. Like I said, no patience whatsoever. "Let it simmer for a bit yet," I said. "What you want to do while we wait?" We decided to cab it to Walmart, which was every single urban Indian's favorite pastime. We scanned the aisles and looked at the furniture, fantasizing about what kind of houses we'd have when we really grew up and had money. What do you want to have with the meatballs? T.S. asked. Hell, I used up about every bit of food I had just to make these. T.S. took out his wallet, emptied his coat and jeans pockets, and pulled together a few dollars in change. Probably got enough here for a box of stovetop, maybe two. He had an obsession with that stuffing, and it was about the only food he could cook well besides those old Chimo progies. So we bought a couple boxes and cab back to my place. T.S.'s mom had an account with the cab companies that she said was for emergencies only, but we figured having a side dish to go with our dinner was excuse enough, so we charged our bill to her account. T.S. made a stuffing and took pride in his work as he fluffed it up with a fork. We then gorged ourselves on this meal, which basically was hamburger and wet croutons, but it hit the spot. Afterwards, on my couch, I spooned him from behind and we watched a movie on his cell phone, thanks to my neighbor's Wi-Fi. I stroked his head and felt the spot where the hair was missing. You never did tell me what happened here, I said. That's nothing. I braided my leg through his and nibbled on his shoulder. Come on, don't be slack. He turned around to face me. I don't know. It's stupid. Tell me, I said. And I'll leave it there. Yeah, I don't really get to read that scene. When I was in Canada Reads, I was up against Honey Butter Pig Bread by Francesca Equiasi, who's a dear friend of mine, also published by Arsenal Pulp. And her book is full of recipes. And it wasn't until Canada Reads when it was Roger Mooking and Devery Jacobs defending the two books. Devery was my defender. And they were talking about all the food in Johnny Appleseed. I never realized how much food there was. So I thought and that is one of my Cookham's recipes that we make every Thanksgiving. It's actually my great-great-grandmother's, but my cooking was like kind of, she perfected it, I suppose you could say. And so my res, Pegwis, is actually right beside a Hutterite colony. And for as long as I know, the kind of great-great-great-great-grandparents have always had good relations with this colony, they're both kind of shepherds of the land. My family's mostly hunters. They are more kind of farmers. And so my family's recipes and my reservations recipes are all this kind of intermixed plethora or cornucopia of both, I would say, Ukrainian food mixed with kind of traditional venison or sometimes even bear meat or rabbit. So it makes for an eclectic feast if you ever visit my family on the res. It's very delicious. So I had a little dinner out here in Blackfoot territory, and I was like, I made my meatballs, and I was like, what kind of white person dish is this? And I was like, actually, it's traditional. Somewhat. It comes from a long lineage. So yeah, I like to share that scene. I'm glad I did. It's been a long time since I've read that. Hopefully everyone's taste buds are ready to eat some dinner tonight. Even if it's soggy croutons. But it's fun for me to return to T.S. and to Johnny's grandmother in these scenes. After Canada Reads, everyone just wanted to hear kind of about Johnny's Cookham, and she kind of became the star of the show. And I see, because she's a little more universal. She's a little more safe, I would say, in terms of the plot and characterizations of this book. And a lot of, I would say, the spotlight was lost from T.S. and Johnny, and was focused on Johnny and his grandmother. And I can see why. There are some very graphic scenes, I would say, in this sexual scene. I don't find them graphic, but to a 60-year-old grandmother, she might find a scene that involves analingus a little too much, but it's very much in there. So it's nice to return to T.S. And like a little bit about the kind of the how this book began. I was actually working with Jordan Abel, who's a Niska editor and poet who wrote Injun, which won the Griffin Poetry Prize, before Billy Ray Belcourt, also Cree queer writer, won with This Wound is a World. He's a dear friend of mine as well, but this was 2016, 2017. So Full Metal and Digiqueer was being written, and in my kind of boisterous Capricorn-esque Cree teachings, I ran into Kevin Williams in Austin, Texas during a conference right after Jordan's work had just been published. And we were in an elevator, and I was like, I'm gonna literally do an elevator pitch, and I did. I was like, I have this weird book about this cybernetic trickster who infects the canon. It's kind of like a computer virus, and he was it's cyberpunk, and he was like, send me the manuscript. It got picked up, thankfully, after years of peddling poems in Winnipeg for pennies, I would say. And that's about 4 or 5 years in the making to make that book. But in the book, in Full Metal, there was these kind of beach scenes, which were very sensual. It didn't quite fit with the kind of mechanical, I would say, the mechanical tone of Full Metal and Digiqueer. So we had to cut them. So Jordan Abel was the one who was like, "You got to get rid of these. They just don't fit." And I'm stubborn, so I never kill my darlings. I put them in some folders. Um, and then when I just started my PhD here at the University of Calgary, there was a course, a creative writing course in the grad studies department of English, entitled 100 Pages in 100 Days. And I had to make a short story or portfolio to submit. And I knew I didn't want to have to study more, more Melville or Dickens. So the creative writing class was my saving grace. Thankfully, I got in. But I didn't know what to do. And Johnny's a character that's been with me for well over about a decade now. He began as a young adult novel that I was beginning when I was about 18, 19. I was very obsessed with the Beatniks, Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, but also some of the lesser known folks like Albert Saijo. And I was writing this book called The Concrete Poets, which was this very existential, overwritten book that featured a multitude of characters who basically were pool hall sharks, made money doing that, and then would kind of smoke weed in this kind of indigenous, artistic frat house, I guess we might say, and have all these existential talks and play piano. This is too much. But there was a tertiary character who was Johnny, who was this very flamboyant pool hall groupie, I guess you could say. So he had been with me since I was 18 or 19. And then I had these beach poems that I had cut, and I needed to make a portfolio, as I was noting, a short story. So I pull the beach poems out, and as Johnny does in his full diva fashion, kind of sashay like right into the middle of my mind, I guess, and the imagination. And he's very bossy. He's more Capricorn than me. It was like, basically, Josh, give me a damn shot. It's my time. 10 years I've been waiting. So I plopped it into these beach scenes, and the book just kind of came to life very organically. Again, we fleshed out the 4 poems that became about 25 pages, which are the first scenes of this book, in which Johnny and T.S. are in the beach and kind of discovering themselves and their kind of queerness or two-spiritedness, or however some characters might define themselves. T.S. probably wouldn't say that, but Johnny definitely much. In Hecla and Gimli Beach in Manitoba. And then the book kept unfurling and unfurling. It became a novella. Johnny was like, "I'm not done." So I had this kind of 2-week retreat in Banff, and it was a frenzy writing about 8 to 10 hours a day, in which he became the fully fledged little book that he is now. So it came very quick. People say it reads like a fever dream. It's very much felt like that. It was under a year that Johnny Appleseed was written. It came very organically, naturally. Johnny became, in a kind of a Cree fashion, a very animate character or being to me. And I kind of, not to romanticize like a muse, but I just kind of had to listen to a character that had been living and sharing and housed in this body that I think we both partake in. So it's a little bit about how Johnny came to, and give me one second, I have to sneeze. Whew. Dog hair. And then folks all would like to ask about, who was the intended audience? Did you ever expect to be winning, Canada's largest literary, I guess, game show almost, on the largest literary stage that Canada has, that is Canada Reads? And I would very confidently say no, I never did. I'm still very overtaken and humbled by the love that Johnny has received by folks across all kind of identity categories and demographics. But originally writing, I had written it for primarily Indigenous readers, and then more specifically Two-Spirit or Indigiqueer/queer Indigenous readers and writers. And I did that because I was at I just remember like kind of the lack of conversation. This was maybe even, it's very big now. But even like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, at least in the prairies, conversations around queerness within indigeneity or transness or not to be non-binary or to be two-spirit were very minimal. They were in small little pockets. I think, with the rise of writers like Billy Ray Belcourt or Jay Simpson or Ariel Twist, and the resurgence of writers like Beth Brandt, Christos, Gregory Schofield, kind of the aunties and uncles who paved the way prior to us, Thompson Highway. I think, yeah, it's become a plethora and a more accessible conversation. And I really attribute that to social media, specifically Instagram, Twitter and TikTok, I think, are the big ones in which some of these dialogues have been happening, both with Indigenous youth, but also Indigenous people at large. And we see it now in our political activism, from Wet'suwet'en to Land Back Lane, and then to the inclusion of G and 2S and MMIW for girls and two-spirited folks. But I initially wrote it for the youth because when I was a younger person, there was no conversation around that. What we might call queerness now was very taboo, was very disallowed, at least in my spaces in Treaty 1. And I attribute, again, a lot of that to residential schools. And I think a lot of the healing that hasn't been done from those schools is foreign of what I guess I would call like same-sex sexual assault. And I think that a lot of that is still held and demonizes queerness and transness and two-spiritedness in the contemporary right now. It's very much still a real thing. So I wrote this book for them, for those youth, due in part to listening to Eden Robinson give a talk at the Fold Festival. And this was about 6-7 years ago now. So it was the Festival of Literary Diversity, and Eden Robinson, a Heisler writer, author of the Trickster series, noted, like, if you don't see yourself in the literary landscape, then it's kind of your job to write yourself into it. And that never left me. So Full Metal, I think, was my first foray into it. But Johnny, I would say, was more of a targeted like storytelling or orality into that kind of that field and to that arena of two-spiritedness, which of course is still a fairly baby term coined in 1990 during the third intertribal gay and lesbian, I think it was Native conference, some type of talk, I'm forgetting off the top of my head. But was coined by Anishinaabe elder Myra Laramie during that conference, in which you can view some of her videos on YouTube. So it's MyraLaramee, Myra Laramie. She shares some of the teachings about how she came to kind of find this word, to gift this word to Indigenous peoples who may identify what we now call queer. But she's very limited about what she shares with who. But so like YouTube is a great reference and peeking into that, but still very much a baby term. And folks ask me all the time, like, why I use this term, or what does indigiqueer mean? What's the difference between the two? Of course, I can't give the absolute or end-all answer, but I can answer for me. And Johnny, I want it to be a very two-spirit novel. Because in my life, in my time, in Western, I guess, languages or identity categories, I guess you could call me like a femme, gay, cis man. But I go by two spirits because, one, it calls me home. I'm very much from that Treaty 1 territory where it was coined. Winnipeg, to me, is such a hub of sex and sexuality and ceremony around all of that, as a space of primary, what we call post-contact nations, like the Ojibwe, of which I am, or the home nation of the Métis, also a post-contact, and just this fusion of all of these different nationhoods and peoplehoods coming together. It being kind of the hub of the trading posts in Canada. So one, like Manitoba, and specifically Winnipeg, tells me that like Indigenous peoples have always used sex for survival, but also for community and union, and also we're sexy people. So I hold on to that very tightly. But I have identified as gay and queer before. Gay ultimately failed me, I think, because the kind of the image that you get when you Google or think of the signifier that comes to mind automatically of gay is like a very stereotypical white man who is able-bodied, who is cis, who is middle to upper class, who is a very specific body type, and which is very true. You go to any pride parade and look on the back of the who's floating or who's on the back of those banks dancing, dancing for pride is gay men. And I just feel like it's lost so much of its political activism and has been so tied to a singular type of, a singular identity, that it was too rooted in whiteness for me. So I left that. I moved to queer, which also began to fail me, because it too was kind of interested in settler colonialism. It was more political, of course, but when I also think of queer history and versus two-spirit history, like Stonewall becomes like the big hub, or the waypoint in queer history here on Turtle Island. In '69, and that's such a small blip. Like, if that's the history, like Indigenous history arcs back even more to originality. So I just kind of felt like our histories, our temporalities, our livelihoods and embodiments just didn't match. So it ultimately felt like it wasn't a fit for me. And then I found Two Spirits, primarily from a lot of trans Indigenous women and non-binary Indigenous folks who were introducing me to this term in Winnipeg. And I had heard of it before, but it had felt so romanticized. But in their explanations of it to me, it felt more like home for me, I guess I would say, or something I could like zipper myself into fully and fit in comfortably. Because it's less about sexual attraction, although that is one part of it, you could say. It also encapsulates one's community role. So I would say I'm very much an auntie in my communities. I partake more roles of caretaking and guidance and mentoring. So it also kind of involves my community engagement as well. It includes my gender. Also included in that, so gender presentation, but also gender roles. And then it also contributes to my ceremonial role in things such as Sundance and Powwow. So like all of that's encapsulated within kind of this pan-Indigenous English term, Two-Spirit. And so much more different than for me, gay or queer, because they're very limited in terms of like attraction or desire, or also historical politics, which just again didn't line up to me. So Two-Spirit encapsulates like these large elements, and of course those are simplified when translated from Nehiyawiwan or Cree into English. In Cree, the term for Two-Spirit, there's multiple terms. Like Napeu Wisquavisat, which would be like a femme man, and vice versa. But the overall term would be Nisamandawag, also meaning Two-Spirit, which is very similar to Anishinaabe which is Nijmandawag, which is where it comes from Myra Laramie, who's Anishinaabe. And so I like really try to embody all of that. And so that is my identity category, which is a multiplicity, isn't so simplified, even though when it's in English, it is a little more simplified in that semblance. And I tried to put all of that into this little book, in which Johnny is encapsulating, one, his like sexual desires and sexual acts, but two, his community roles, three, his kind of sometimes even going against ceremony and finding terminology for himself against linguistic gatekeepers who tell him, feminist or queerness is disallowed or was never a thing. And four, he also kind of plays the role of an auntie too, in which he kind of eats everyone's pain and alleviates them of that, and then regurgitates beauty. So I very much think of Johnny, his like role in life and in his communities is to be a pain eater in that semblance. He's got a knack for it. So all of those elements, I would say, are kind of, the behind the scenes, like if you lift the kind of the veil of Oz, those were all kind of the stitches behind what I was trying to do with Johnny. And I hope it accomplished some of it. I think it has at least one or two of those objectives. And I'm just so happy he gives so much to folks. And folks treat him like medicine. They never pull a root. They just snip what they need and come back in a few months or a year and can harvest again at a different time for a different need. And so Johnny is medicinal to me and to hopefully to others like that too.
Thank you, Joshua. I don't know if this is my turn to cut in, but you've so much to learn from what you've said. I was going to turn it over to question period. I was wondering though, and I hope I'm not. I know I can't speak for anybody else. Could you read just another little snippet before I turn it over to questions?
Another little snip, sure.
That was just so wonderful. I really enjoyed your reading.
Of course, let me find one. Maybe we'll do one with Johnny's mother. Okay, here it is. So this is Johnny and his mother, and also about Winnipeg. So Winnipeg again. I'm very interested in the Red River and the Assiniboine and being, kind of the central hub of trade, and also for me the sexiest Indigenous city. So this is about all of that. I drew myself a bath. My tub, the grunge yellow of cigarette-stained fingers, hairs clinging to its sides and its perimeters. As I sat down on it, I thought of the Red River that gushed blood and guts and catfish just a few blocks away. I wondered how cold the rapids in Peguis were right now, those fat leeches waiting for a fish to suckle off. Here, my penis wriggling in the bath, I too am cheap tackle. Those frothy waters full of lucky cans and severed hands and oak leaves that clogged our drain pipes. Water was a mentor to me, a playmate. Water was a feral child. I used to sit on the bank of the rapids, feet dangling in the stream. If I stayed still long enough, the crawfish would climb over them and inspect the grooves between my toes. What would life be like if I were a crawfish? A little pest that ages too fast, only 3 months, and then they're plunged into the cruel world of adulthood. To be a crawfish is to be in constant fear of your own self, to be ripped apart by kin who pierce your soft spots with teeth and claws that shred you from the inside out. To be a crawfish, I thought, is the best primer for survival. If you can make it as a crawfish, you can make it as anything. I plucked the crawfish from my toes and let the water have it. Let it fumble, scramble, try to live. The rapids are an apocalyptic Mad Max landscape. I watched it catch its groove, then tumble into the ducks and disappear. Who knows where it would end up? I hoped it would continue living, even if only one more day, but who really knows these things? The water is a furious road, and the only words we have to say to one another are simple, witness me. The water in Winnipeg was just as feral as the rapids in Peguis. The only difference was that this river ate children, not crawfish. My cookum used to tell me that Manitoba was a name taken from the Cree, Manitoapa, which meant something like the Strait of the Spirit, S-T-R-A-I-T. She said it was the sound of the drum, of water beating the rocks in a constant thrum, noise like a round dance where the water would ask you to sing alongside it. The river is a space of convergence, where streams and currents intersect briefly, an orgy of kissing streams, a hub of sex and slapping fins. The water is the color of rust, the kind of rust that becomes a sequin when a raindrop hovers over it. When I look out over the red, I see the strait, but I wonder just what in the hell a spirit is doing out there. How many Manitou? Was mine out there too? Why would the water straighten my spirit? Ain't that why I have two? A little Manitoba backstory there too.
Thank you. You're going to have half of Newfoundland moving to Manitoba now.
Come on down. Come on. Just go away in the winter. It's -42 right now. I just called my mom not too long ago.
Joshua, thank you so much. I'm sure there are a lot of a lot of people interested in asking questions. I'm going to actually just turn this over to the audience rather than, asking you a question myself, or to the fellow panelists. So if anybody has a question, if you want to engage your mic or enter it in chat, that'd be wonderful. Can I just ask a quick question after all? I was just in that last riff, where you were, the last piece that you just read. I couldn't help notice how much there was the poetic rhythms in your prose. And I was wondering, how much do you consider yourself kind of a multi-genre writer, or how much of your poetic technique finds its way into your prose? Do you find that there's some kind of poetic characteristic to your prose writing?
I mean, I very much do. I think a lot of that comes from I can't stand silence. Like hurts my ears. So I sleep with a fan on. Recently, I put two on because my dog gets hot. And with my partner's always like, it feels like we're like sleeping underneath an airplane. There's just so much wind, so much noise, but I need it to sleep. And also when I write, I listen to music. So when I was writing Johnny Appleseed, I am also a diehard and born and bred country boy. So country music is my usual go-to. But when I was listening to Johnny Appleseed, I was kind of listening to an amalgamation of different music styles to kind of get into the psyche and into kind of perhaps like the vibe of Johnny, and depending on where he was. Maybe I was acting kind of like a director. So some of the slower scenes, like on the reservation, I would be listening to Dolly Parton, Loretta Lynn, Patsy Cline. And then in some other moments when Johnny's in the city, I would switch to more contemporary, like pop and hip hop, like Doja Cat. I'm less versed in this. Dua Lipa would be another one, like Nicki Minaj. Lady Gaga, because like it helped me set the tone. And then I find when I'm listening to certain music styles, it also influences the rhythm of how I'm writing. So for example, like that scene here, the water scene, was actually I had to write it as a poem first and then translate it over to prose. And when I was listening to that, I wanted to get into a very kind of, downtown urban reservation feel. So I was listening to A Tribe Called Red, and Snotty Nose Red's Kids. And even when I read it, I can still kind of hear the percussion and the rhythms of the words and the bass, and so like that I think really leached into the writing, kind of the sound and the rhythm and the overall musicality. And other scenes like the beehive scene or the beehive honey scene, that I read earlier today was very much old school country. Like Walking After Midnight and Don't Come Home a Drinking, look, the old school lovely country female singers. And so like it has a slower tone to it, specifically I think when dialogue comes in. But I do consider myself also, as your first part of your question, very much I always say this. I say this to my class, where they burst out laughing. It's like, well, it's not wrong. I'm a genre outlaw as much as I am a gender outlaw. So I don't like to adhere to any kind of borders or boundaries in writing as much as I don't adhere to them in a political sense on the land that I'm upon, aside from the sovereign nations of the indigenous peoples. So borders, territories, provinces. And I felt like I need to do that on the page too. So I also don't like to adhere to any singular form, having done poetry and then prose and then now nonfiction. They're all very similar to me, I think. And essay writing, I would say academic writing is also a type of creative writing. But at the base of it all, I'm teaching fiction right now here at the University of Calgary. At the base of it all, I think, is poetics, which I think is just a fancier word for saying orality. In that it has like the base tools for sound really, and for memorization through things like repetition or the fancier word for anaphora. So I think at the base of everything is an understanding of poetics, and then if I try to translate that, it simply just becomes oral storytelling. And I think so. Yeah, I would say like poetry or poetics is at the base of all my writing, and then I just infuse what the characters need or what the plot needs or what the story needs with different kind of forms or genres. So it's a mishmash of everything, I think, and would be a disservice, I really think, to call any of my writing any singular one type, I suppose, if I had to say anything about that.
Thank you, Joshua. Well, we do have some questions here.
Question, how did you get into writing in the first place?
How did I get into writing? I feel like, again, if you ever visit my parents, this is also why I don't like introducing any partners to them. When you visit them, like teasing is a love language. I would say of a lot of Indigenous people, but specifically my family. So when I go home, it's like their primary objective to humble Joshua Whitehead. I think I'm quite humble already, but to humble me. So anytime I'm home, it's like basically the roast of Joshua Whitehead for like the first 3 days. And you can't take it serious because it's all out of love. Like, for example, to say like you're ugly is a compliment. So there's things like that which sometimes don't translate well to white partners I bring home. My sister just called me ugly. I was like, yeah, she's saying you look great. It's hyperbolic. It's kind of mean, but it's not mean. It's just, yeah, understand the vernaculars. Anyways, if you visit my family, they will immediately bring out this big box that they have saved of things I've been writing since I was like 5 or 6, about 5, of like poetry that I used to write and little stories I used to tell that they recorded. And all sorts of little narratives that they've just kind of kept that I've written on my own or with them or brought home from school. I have this like story of like anthropomorphic toys, and I have to check like this the timestamp. I'm like, I don't know if I wrote it first or Toy Story came first, but we'll find out. I get next time I go home. But I feel like I've always kind of been writing, and I think I've always been writing because when I'd go to the reservation or like we visit family, specifically my grandmother's up in Pegwis. All the boy cousins, would go outside and play with with the uncles and the 4x4s, and catch garter snakes. Pegwis is very close to Narcisse snake dens, and I'm terrified of snakes. Or play with the res dogs, which I liked too. But I would spend most of my time just in the kitchen with my grandmothers and my aunties and all my women cousins, and they would all sit around a big table and drink red rose tea and eat slabs of bannock and storytell, really. Snagging stories. If you don't know what snagging is, it's like hookup sex stories. They would tell those bingo hall stories. Also like the kind of the anti-grandmother whisper network of things to be weary of or watch out for. But they also all had a knack to one-up each other. So something had to be funnier, or someone had to be more angry, or tell a sadder story. And so it kind of became this like oral competition of like who could tell the funniest story, who could tell the saddest story, who could tell the most mean auntie story. And I would just be sitting on the floor like a little boy, just like staring up and watching and listening and laughing with them, even if I didn't always get the jokes. And so like that, I think was like my tutelage as a young kid into writing and storytelling, was just listening to these women make up romance novels and make up mystery novels and horror stories and speculative fiction. There's a lot of alien stories in my family, and Bigfoot and little people. And so I was like, being trained right there by all these women in my family about genre, about form, about repetition and memory, and about comedy, tragedy. So that was the best, I think, the best class to be in for creative writing. And I still go back. It's a little less, quite a bit less folks now in terms of women in my family, but we still keep that tradition up. And now I have my own snagging stories to add to it. So.
Perfect. Around here on the West Coast, where you can hear my French accent. People will start, if they want to one up you, they'll say, "That's nothing." And they'll start their story, right?
Oh, I love that.
So another question. I find it so interesting how you're talking about how terms in native languages are living and they are so deep to one's identity. But in English, the term creates it to just be one singular term. I'm just wondering how language revitalization has allowed you to be more yourself.
Oh, great question. I think as you move through my books, so from Full Metal to Johnny to my edited anthology, I actually do have it here, to Love After the End, and then to my forthcoming book, Making Love with the Land, I think you can start to know, you'll be able to see and hear my own kind of revitalization in Cree happening, and most of it's autodidactic, or meaning I teach myself. I've taken a few courses here or there, but most of it's just me learning through books that I've purchased, or there's a Cree app that I have, which I love to do. I'm a big fan of etymology, so anytime I find a word, I'm like, I need to find out where its origins are in English, translate it to Cree, and then find out that origin. And it's such a playground of meaning for me as a writer, and also just as a person interested in language. So yeah, and then a lot of it's just kind of from calling my aunties and talking with them. And if I say something wrong, they're very loving and accepting of it until they post about it on Facebook, because as aunties do, everyone laughs at it. So it's very loving too. So yeah, most of it's autodidactic, but we're self-taught. And oral teaching too, some telephone calls or conversations I have. When I go to Edmonton as well, I try to practice because there's tons of Cree folks up there. A bit of a different dialect, but it still generally works. But it does help me, one, become a better writer and become a better person, and find more power in my own storytelling. So for example, what could I give to you? Like sagitin, or to say, so that is love, or say, I love you, gisagitin. So love is also very different in English, and English, it just means to have a love object, or to love something, or to love someone, which obviously has a large kind of web of meaning. But in Cree, it's also it's a speaking into being of an animate thing between two lovers, or someone who loves something else. So it also partakes, and this could be platonic, romantic, sexual, or it could be between humans and non-humans, such as my dog, who's I think still sleeping, thankfully. So again, when we were speaking about love in a Cree formation, we're speaking about a duty and responsibility we have to them, not only as a partner or as a pet, or as like the work, like rivers and stuff. We can love those too. It automatically sets up a reciprocal and communal caretaking formation, beyond and within the confines of love, sexual love, or platonic love, or friendship love. So it sets you up as kin, which is a big thing to say. To be kin is very different than to be lovers or partners, because it entails a caretaking process over time, for a long period of time, and puts you into community together. So like love, and to speak the speech act to love someone or something, is a very intense and honorific regard, versus how kind of freely I think we say it in English, where its repetition becomes so repetitive that it kind of loses meaning. Specifically in the age of social media and tech. So it's thrown around a lot. So it has a deeper and more kind of an honorific title, I would say, in Cree. So yeah, for me, like the meaning is always so much deeper, and English is just kind of so surface level. I find that English fails me a lot, and I can kind of get out of those failures through translation into Cree, or thinking through a Cree lens.
Kate has a question, and while we're getting her set up to be able to ask it, Sabrina asked, do you plan to record your work as an audiobook? I think you already said that you were tired of doing that already.
I have recorded as an audiobook. It's available on Audible. A funny story about that. So Johnny, again, in Cree fashion, we animate things. So Johnny, to me, it feels like a very animate being, an animate character who helps me consistently. So there's been times like, I don't know, I think I can afford rent this month. And then all of a sudden, Johnny's like, I got you, check the mail, as a royalty check. We got rent this month. Or in other more serious manners, Johnny, Appleseed, and T.S., I was in a 4.5-year long relationship when I was writing this and was published, which ultimately, fizzled out. We're good friends now. And we became good friends because he and I both had to do the audiobook after this intense breakup and move out from our shared house to do the audiobook for this. So it took 7 days, about 8 to 10 hours in a hot booth in the middle of July here in Calgary. And through Johnny, it was also like kind of a mending of your relationship, closing that up, and then opening up and blossoming into a friendship. So Johnny helped me in that regard too, and it was all thanks to the audiobook.
Hi, Josh. Can you hear me?
Hi, Kate. I can.
Hi. So thank you so much for visiting us. I find your work so interesting. Thank you very much. I have a question, and actually it's something you said that made me wonder about this. You said at some point, T.S. wouldn't say that, but Johnny would. And I starting to wonder, like, what is that process like for you to construct characters? Because I imagine, like, when I think about acting, right, I can understand like diving into the character and really, staying true to a character for a long period of time. So, what's it like to develop a character and develop such specific characters at the same time? And I'm just wondering, are there moments when you kind of test something out, or you're surprised by something your character does, or you see something in terms of like, oh, they would never do that. Absolutely not. I'm just wondering about, what's that like? I feel like it takes, it's a position that has to have many subjectivities ongoing all the time. And I find it like such an interesting process.
That's a great question. It's funny because I always be like, sometimes when I'm doing events, I'm like, yeah, me and Johnny will be there at 3:30. Like, why do I keep referring to Johnny like the first person, like as an actual person who's joining me? So yes, I've done that for a lot. And so yeah, I was saying T.S. would not identify as queer. I think he's still very much in kind of the closet, even though he has a very queer relationship with Johnny, in which they don't shy away from any type of romantic or sexual sharing. Um, and so I'm also working right now with producer and some writers on the TV adaptation of Johnny. So that's also like very in my head. But I do think like I know these characters very intimately, because I think of writing sometimes as method acting, really, in which I need to fully flesh a character out. I need to know minute details about them, which to me are so much more important than kind of larger philosophical concepts about a character. Are they this? Are they that? Do they believe in God? Are they cis? Are they femme? I like to know the minute details, and what I mean by that is like, I think freckles, wounds, scars, these are huge, tiny little bits on our body, sometimes larger. But tiny in terms of percentage of our kind of epidermis or skin or body, very minuscule. But they also hold and house such large stories. How does one get a scar? How does one get a wound? Where did someone get, this missing patch of hair? How did someone crack this tooth? And so for me, like honing in on those are the primary way for me to characterize characters. It's very much how I characterize Johnny. I felt like I had to know, like, what does desire taste like to Johnny? What does Johnny's skin feel like when he's angry? Like how to tie his emotions to his senses, really, and where could I see that? Just so I didn't always have to rely on he said or exclamation points. Rather, I could rely more on animations in the writing. So yeah, I would say method acting was the primary way that I kind of got to know these characters, and then braiding them with people I know. So for example, T.S., the last story that I shared about the audiobook, is very imbricated with my previous long-term partner, in which like there's an example like Johnny and Tias talk about this verb they make up to burrito, as kind of this romantic cuddling act, which is taken directly from our shared romantic and sexual life, me and my last partner. So adding elements from people as well to kind of give them real life attributes, and to kind of play Frankenstein and like breathe some life into them, while also knowing the minute sensual and bodily details. And with Johnny specifically, I've known him as a character for a long time. The other characters are fairly new, I suppose, in the kind of 10-year span that I've known of Johnny. And folks ask me in workshops, and I tell this to my fiction students right now, to sleep with their characters. And it always kind of rouses laughter. Like, what the hell is Josh talking about? And what I mean by that is, like, when I couldn't sleep, I have really bad insomnia. What I would do is like storytell in my head, like start to list these attributes or think about Johnny's past. And oftentimes I just found myself dreaming of Johnny or as Johnny. So it was also a way of like me getting to know this character much more intimately. And I've tried that with other characters as well. And it has helped, at least with Johnny. My nonfiction was kind of just me excavating my own self. But that was also a way for me to make the characters feel authentic and feel real, and giving them specific dialogue or quirks that they would do so that it always sounded like them. And that's how I got to know them so intimately. So I could say like Jordan would never do this, TS would never eat this, Johnny would never say that. For me, that was just like also kind of like a little badge of honor. It's like I know these characters, like they are real to me. It was so those are kind of the elements that I used to achieve that.
Great. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you,
There's
Kate.
one more question, and it's not a question. It's actually, can you tell us about your next book? So it's a plug. It's an option for a plug.
Mm. I feel like RuPaul now. Yeah, so my next book is coming out. Unfortunately, it's not spring. It actually just got delayed a little more. It's been delayed almost a year and change now because of COVID. But I've been told this is the last one. That's official. We did sign some stuff. I will be announcing the cover in about two and a half weeks. So that'll be with CBC Books. You can also catch it on my social media, which is both on Instagram and Twitter at jwhitehead204. Everyone asks why I use 204 in all my stuff. It's the area code of Manitoba. I'm very loyal to Manitoba Pound, not Manitoba. So the next book, Making Love with the Land, will be coming out summer, so most likely July of this year. And it's a book of nonfiction, or as much as at this point I'm like, is it nonfiction? Is it prose? Is it poetry? Is it essay? Is it theory? It's all those things. But for the sake of detailing, it's nonfiction and details primarily indigeneity, so primarily Creeness. Takes place in two spaces for the majority of it all. So Treaty 7 here in Mckenzie, Calgary, and then Treaty 1 in Manitoba, as well as my reservation again. So details, yeah, in Creeness, indigeneity, mental health, and queerness. And it came out of a conversation. It's still kind of a sibling. I'll call all my stories sibling stories. Like Full Metal led me to Johnny with the beach scenes. Johnny has led me to this one, and this line that he has in the book, his grandmother has. She says, "A humility is just a humiliation that you loved so much it transformed." And it really kind of got me thinking after I finished Johnny, and I had been touring with Johnny, and the impacts that it had on my mental health, on my relationships, being gone for long periods of time. Yeah, it got me to thinking like about mental health and about secret conversations I would always have to have with family and friends who are Indigenous about things like depression or suicidal inclination or anxiety. And I was like, why are you whispering this to me? Like, these should be conversations we should be having loudly and proudly for the sake of all of our health. So it got me to thinking that line specifically, if humility is just humility is just a humiliation you love so much it transformed. Humiliation is a bad thing, right? Often stems into a lot of mental health. And then so I got to thinking like more in a Cree fashion, like what if we animated our mental health? Like what if insomnia could be a boon as it became a method of writing and method acting for me, for Johnny. Insomnia was a big part of that. What if anxiety, we can see it as ancestral warning to not enter or go into spaces or to, partake with certain people. And so like, what if we could like rejig this a little bit to think about mental health, not as necessarily a parasite to a body or our bodies as a host, but also as like a boon or also as a kind of ancestral coding. So the book is detailing that, and it goes over topics that I personally experienced and topics that are researched that include those topics: anxiety, suicidal inclinations for Indigenous youth across Turtle Island, depression, breakups are in there. The kind of behind the scenes writing of Johnny is in there too. Eating disorders is in there and body dysmorphia. So it goes through all these things, but it kind of brings it right back to the land. So again, the title, Making Love with the Land, is finding ways in which the land itself holds queer teachings and Indigenous teachings for us to think about and think through and think with some of these things we might call mental health issues.
Now, Stephanie, I'm going to ask permission. There is another question. Do you think we can get it?
We can. Yes, we
Okay,
can. Thanks,
perfect.
Evan.
I was interested in your reference to cyberpunk earlier. I was wondering what drew you to this genre, or perhaps what it offers to gender or sexual fluid narratives.
Ooh, good question. I am a huge quote unquote Indigen nerd. Like the trailer for the Multiverse of Madness, Doctor Strange, just came out. I was screaming.
Same. Cheers.
I was so excited after having watched just Spider-Man No Way Home. And like, so all of my kind of like childhood nerdiness came together. I don't want to spoil anything, but it was amazing. But I grew up, so like libraries were also a big refuge for me when I was a kid. So I grew up reading C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, but Ursula Le Guin was a big one for me. Specifically, her short story, Those Who Walk Away from Omelas. And they are kind of these extraterrestrial entities that have this ability to undergo chemmering, Kemmering. And in the chemmering is kind of when they either reproduce or have romantic or sexual attraction. And with the chemmering, these kind of sexless and genderless alien entities can take on male or female or masculine or feminine attributes of their own choice. So like that was big for me. And then I got into cyberpunk because I was also really drawn to, I've always been fascinated, both haunted by and can't take my eyes off of apocalypses, if it's going to be plural, both as an indigenous person and indigenous people and queer folks having survived waves and waves of apocalypse already. Here we think in COVID we're in the kind of like the first one. Not really. To be an apocalyptic survivor, I think is coded into my codex and indigenous codexes. And so I've always been drawn to apocalypse. I think that comes from a lot of I also grew up in Selkirk, Manitoba. And we would always get Jehovah's Witnesses who would hand out the Watchtower when I was walking to school, and it'd be like, Second Christ is coming, apocalypse is here, Y2K I was fascinated with, 2012 I was fascinated with. So cyberpunk was a genre that I've always been drawn to because it doesn't shy away from apocalypse. In fact, it embraces it. And I think it asks the question we're all asking right now in a global pandemic. It's like, well, what comes after? Because surely something does. Is it utopic? Can it be utopic? Is it a resurgence? Is it revitalization? And that question has always fascinated me, and cyberpunk never shied away from it. So things like William Gibson's Neuromancer as a book I'm really drawn to. Schismatrix is another book. All of Ursula Le Guin, films like Blade Runner and Akira, I think are very seminal to my understanding of that. And then also Kent Monkman is a queer two-spirit painter and artist, also makes a lot of really interesting cyberpunk stuff. And so like we also used one of his images, I think it's called The Ride, of him riding on this red motorcycle in downtown Winnipeg as the cover for Full Metal Indigiqueer. And funny enough, my niece, she's 6 now, she has the coolest name ever. Her name is Akira, Akira. And I was like, I got named Joshua from the Bible. Really? She gets this world-ending cyber biopunk who just like rebuilds stuff and kills a character named Canada. What? So yeah, cyberpunk and biopunk something I've always been drawn to. Comics as well. When I speak of biopunk, I mean something like the X-Men. So yeah, I've always been drawn to it, and I think that comes from a lot of stories that I heard too as a kid around that table I was talking about with my aunties and grandmothers and all the women. We never shied away from telling extraterrestrial or horror stories that involve things we might think of as cyberpunk. And so like, it begs me to ask the question, like, is this genre or is this, realism? It just depends on kind of what side you're looking at it from. So cyberpunk was something I've been drawn to. And I guess I can give like a small teaser. So I have a 2-book deal with Knopf. So Making Love with the Land is the first one. And I am returning to the novel because I can't do any more nonfiction. It's been very emotionally and mentally draining. So I'm returning to fiction, and I'm currently working on a biopunk novel. So stay tuned for that. If you're fans of anything I mentioned, I'm sure that's going to be right in your alley. So it's the return of the Indigener, Josh, and he's coming back. He's coming back.
Excellent. And Canada rides a red bike, a bright, it is the color that we see on the flag too.
Exactly, yeah.
I don't see any other questions, Stephanie, so if you wanted to...
I will unfortunately wrap this up. I could listen for a lot more.
Same.
I just wanted to, I won't make this, a long conclusion, but really, thank you so much. I know you've enriched my life, and I'm just, I'm a bit overwhelmed by the number of things you've got your hands into, right? And especially in terms of literary genre, it's wonderful. But I thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us. And I just have to say thank you to the funding body for this too. We were, Natalie Pender and I, were funded through our Pride Room. We have just a little Pride Room at Grenfell campus, and we were funded, or that's where we secured funding to bring you here tonight. And so I just want to say a big thank you to Scholarship in the Arts Program. And you've got me very interested in Winnipeg, Joshua. When I'm looking for a place, I'm going to give you a call, and you can give me all the lowdown about the neighborhood and such.
I got you. Call me up.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Ed, and thank you, Aaron. And thank you so much, Ivan, for helping me out. You know what my technical difficulties are. Thank you for being with us, Ian. And I hope we can have you back here physically one day in Newfoundland, Josh.
I'll say thank you to everyone as well who's involved behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, the funders, to both you, Stephanie, and Natalie, to Ian, and to Ivan, and to all those folks who are running this very smoothly. All the cogs are working. As we say in Cree Dome, we never say bye as a finality. We just say see you again. So I can't wait to come see you and on the East Coast, and we can all argue about the rain. We'll see who's worse.
It's the same in Mi'kmaq. The word for see you later is Namultus.
Oh, Gito. Hi. Thank you, my friends.
have a comment about this program, we'd love to hear it. Email or call us, or send us your feedback through social media.
From the bizarre to the beautiful. This is the performance of their lives.
The Mating Game. New episode, Sunday at 8 on BBC Earth. Now in free preview.